In this video, I'm going to be talking about a real conversation that I had with an atheist and how I used his own logic against him. But if you haven't been here before, welcome. This is Catholic Truth, your place to know the truth of Jesus Christ and the Catholic faith. If you haven't visited our website before, it's thecatholictruth.org. We also have a podcast, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and much more, all down below. So I was talking to a group of people once, and I had mentioned God, and all of a sudden, this person says, "Wait, what? You actually believe in God?" And I said, "Oh yes, very strongly." And he said, "Really?" He's like, "Let me guess, you also believe in Jesus?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And he said, "Let me ask you a question then, Mr. Christian." He's like, "Have you ever seen Jesus?" And I said, "No." He said, "Have you ever heard Jesus?" I said, "Not audibly." And he said, "Have you ever felt Jesus?" I said, "No." Then he slams his hand down on the table and yells, "Then he doesn't exist! If you haven't seen him, felt him, heard him, or touched him, he does not exist." How's that, Mr. Christian? This guy was, of course, very over-the-top sassy. And I responded, "Well, let me ask you a question in return. Have you ever seen your brain?" He said, "No." I said, "Have you ever felt it?" He said, "No." I said, "Have you ever heard it?" He said, "No." I said, "Have you ever smelled it or touched it or anything else?" He said, "No." I said, "Then it doesn't exist. By your own logic, your brain doesn't exist because you personally haven't touched it." He said, "Yeah, but I could go to a hospital and see it in an MRI or something." I said, "That's not your argument. You said if you haven't seen Jesus, then he's not true. So my argument is that if you haven't seen your brain, then it's not true. You said that if you haven't heard or touched Jesus, then he's not true. And I'm saying that if you haven't heard or touched your own brain, then it's not true by your own logic." And he said, "Fine, okay, whatever, touche." And he kind of just let it go at that. Now, granted, this is very low-hanging fruit. It was not a very good argument, so I didn't give a very good answer, but I guess it was enough to satisfy him. Now, a lot of atheists give answers and accusations like this. Most atheists I talk to do not know why they don't believe in God. They accuse Christians of having no proof that God exists, yet they have no proof for why God doesn't exist. And I constantly ask atheists, "Why don't you believe in God?" And they're like, "Well, because he doesn't exist." "Yeah, but how do you know that?" "Well, there's just no proof." "How do you know that? What proof have you studied? How many books have you ever read written by a theist, written by a believer from beginning to end? And what were the names of the books?" Now, most atheists, almost all, have said, "Oh, we don't read books. Oh, we don't need to read books because we know there's no proof." So basically what you're telling me is that you haven't studied, you haven't done any research, you haven't looked into the evidence, you haven't looked into the proof, and you haven't done really intellectual research. You can't see it on my shelf right there, but I have a book up there called New Proofs for the Existence of God. It's actually a very interesting book, which I think most atheists would even find interesting. So most atheists haven't studied these. And I get into conversations all the time where I say, why don't you believe in God?" "Well, I don't know, just because he doesn't exist." "Well, how do you know that?" "Because I just know. You guys are brainwashed." "Well, have you studied the proof?" "Well, no, I just know that he doesn't exist." It's the same kind of logic that they condemn in Christians. "Oh, I just believe because." They just don't believe because. Now, of course, this isn't all atheists. There are some atheists who have some good arguments, not the majority in my opinion. And I certainly don't include Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens in the argument of having good arguments. But there are some atheists that do have some good arguments. But this guy certainly was not one of them. He gave very bad logic for why Jesus didn't exist. We could have gotten into a whole conversation about, well, what is proof? What does it mean to see? Do we have to believe things that we don't see? What about the inside of a black hole, or dark energy, or dark matter, or the farthest sides of the universe, which we haven't even discovered yet? But once we do, they're still going to, they're there whether we've discovered them or not yet. Just because we don't have the capability of getting there doesn't mean they don't exist just because we can't see them. And then we could get into other discussions, or we could have if he was a little deeper. And, we could have talked about what does it mean to understand God, or how do we know God exists? Can you know that something exists without seeing it? And there's a lot of good questions that we could talk about, but of course this man wasn't there yet. But over the next year, I ran into him about a year later, and he actually came up to me and he said, "Hey, guess what? You remember that conversation we had about God?" He's like, "I actually believe in God now." He's like, "I had some really crazy experiences and I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I've come to the conclusion that God does exist." And he was a totally different person. He wasn't angry or sassy. He was actually very nice, peaceful, joyful, loving, totally different than what he was before. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. So God can work in people's lives. If you find these kind of conversations interesting, I mentioned this conversation in my book, Why Do You Believe in God? And this is actually 15 real conversations that I've had with atheists, skeptics, non-believers, and they're all really good, polite conversations. I enjoyed them all. And even like chapter 5 with a scientifically minded atheist was very feisty. I mean, he was very feisty, and sometimes he got angry, but he loved the conversation at the end. And I always thoroughly enjoy talking about these things with other people. So if you want to hear both sides, you know, how do we know God exists? And what would they say in return? And what would I say in return to that? And how would they respond? This is the book to check it out. And if you know someone who has questions, or you're someone who just has a lot of questions, deep faith questions, this is the book for you. Why do you believe in God? And it talks about other things too, like the resurrection, Jesus, the Bible, bad things in history, like, you know, or so what people say. The Galileo affair. Did the Catholic Church hate Galileo because he had science? And all of these other topics that we talk about in the book. There are good answers for our good questions. Unfortunately, on both sides, people aren't taking the time to really research. Many Christians, many theists don't know why they believe in God. And I always ask at the beginning of all my retreats, why do you believe in God? And they say, well, faith. I said, well, what's faith? They say, where you believe in something you can't see. I say, do you believe in the Easter Bunny? They say, no. I say, why? You can't see that. If faith is believing in something you can't see, why don't you believe in the Easter Bunny? This is not faith. Faith is not believing in something we can't see. Faith has to be rational. It has to be based off some evidence, you know, that we can verify in some way. And so I really try to challenge believers to know why they believe in God and not just accept it. Because if you just accept it and you don't understand it, you're not going to live your faith. I also try to challenge atheists to understand why they don't believe in God, to challenge why the reasons that they think God does not exist, or the lame excuses many times that they have given that God does not exist. And there are so many other reasons why atheists are atheists rather than God doesn't really exist. And we could talk about that, and I have talked about that in other videos. But if you like this video, definitely check out our other videos. We have 2 or 3 other videos on conversations with atheists and the existence of God and evidence for God and that sort of thing. And we'll be making more in the future. But I would love to know your thoughts, whether you are a believer or a non-believer. I would love to know your thoughts respectfully down in the comments section. What do you think about this guy? And if you like this video, please like it and share it. And make sure to check out our social media below. And make sure to check out our other platforms below too. And if you're someone who loves our ministry and loves what we do, please consider supporting us on PayPal or on Patreon. We have 2 different ways to support: yearly, monthly, or one time, or bi-yearly, whatever you would like. But if we need people to support our ministry so we can keep doing this work. Thank you so much for praying about it, and God bless you.